My name is Melanie. I always believed I was living a happy and stable life. I had a wonderful husband, Ben, who supported me in everything, and my best friend, Sophie, who was like a sister to me. We had been friends since university, and I never once doubted her loyalty. But as it turned out, the two people I trusted the most were the ones who betrayed me. It all started with little things. Ben had recently lost his job, and I did everything I could to support him. Sophie often offered to help as well, coming over to our house to talk to Ben while I was busy at work. I thought it was her way of supporting me, but soon I began noticing things that made me question everything. One day, I came home from work earlier than usual and found Sophie in our kitchen. She was standing by the stove, cooking something with Ben. Their conversation was lighthearted, their laughter effortless, but as soon as I stepped into the room, they fell silent. "Oh, Melanie, you're home already?" Sophie said with a bright smile, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Yeah, I decided to finish early today," I replied, trying to hide my surprise. It was just a small moment, but it felt off. I forced myself to believe I was overthinking it. Sophie had always been around, so why should her frequent visits suddenly bother me? A few days later, something else caught my attention. While tidying up the bedroom, I found an earring on the floor near the bed. It wasn't mine, and I knew for sure there was only one person it could belong to, Sophie. "Ben, do you know whose earring this is?" I asked, holding up the small piece of jewelry. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "It's probably Sophie's. She must have dropped it when she came over to talk to me about you," he said, trying to sound casual. Once again, I forced myself to believe there was nothing strange about it. But deep down, something told me this wasn't the end of it. The final straw came late one night. Ben had left his phone on the living room table, and as I passed by, I saw a message flash across the screen. "I need to talk to you. It's important. Sophie." My heart started racing. Why was my best friend texting my husband in the middle of the night? And what could be so important that she couldn't tell me instead? I tried not to panic, but I could no longer ignore what was happening around me. The intuition I had silenced for so long was now screaming at me. The truth could be far worse than I imagined. After the late-night message, I knew I couldn't just sit back and ignore the signs anymore. Uncertainty was eating me alive, but I needed to uncover the truth. I decided to start small, checking how often Sophie and Ben communicated and whether there was anything else I had overlooked. The next morning, Ben went to take a shower, leaving his phone on the nightstand. A knot tightened in my stomach as I reached for it, torn between fear and guilt. This was something I had never done before, but the circumstances left me no choice. I unlocked the phone and quickly found his chat with Sophie. As I scrolled through their messages, nothing was explicitly incriminating, yet the emotional intimacy between them was undeniable. "You're so strong. Don't forget, I'm always here for you. Thank you, Sophie. You're saving me." My blood boiled. They were discussing me, talking about my struggles at work, how exhausted I had been. It felt like a betrayal of trust, even if their connection was only emotional. That evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer and confronted Ben directly. "You've been talking to Sophie a lot lately, haven't you?" He froze for a brief second before responding too calmly. "Well, yeah. She's worried about you and wants to help." "Worried about me?" I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Then why is she messaging you in the middle of the night about something important?" He shrugged, trying to remain composed. "Sophie is dramatic, you know that. She wanted to ask how to support you better." His words made sense, but something in his demeanor made my doubts deepen even more. A few days later, I stumbled upon something even stranger. In one of her messages, Sophie had mentioned the word deal. "I think our deal was the right decision." She won't even notice. What did that mean? I searched through the context, but the full conversation didn't give away much. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Had they agreed to hide something from me? Or was it something even worse? I knew I needed more proof. The next day, while Ben was at a meeting, I called Sophie. Hey, Sophie. We haven't seen each other in a while. Want to grab a coffee? She hesitated for a split second before responding. Of course, Melanie. I'd love to see you. This meeting would be my first step toward uncovering the truth. I had no idea what I would find. The next day, I met Sophie at our favorite cafe. She arrived with her usual bright smile, radiating warmth as if nothing had happened. But I no longer saw her as the friend I once trusted unconditionally. Instead, I was staring at someone who might have been deceiving me all along. You look a little tense, Melanie. Is everything okay? She asked, her large eyes filled with feigned innocence. Just a lot of work, I lied, trying to keep my expression relaxed. We chatted about trivial things, work, weekend plans, but I was waiting for the conversation to steer in the direction I needed. And finally, she made the first move. How's Ben? He's been looking a little tired lately, Sophie said, taking a sip of her coffee.
Oh, he's fine.
Though I've noticed you, and he've been getting quite close recently, I said casually, though my voice wavered slightly. Sophie froze for a barely noticeable moment before flashing a small smile. Well, I've always tried to help you both. Ben is going through a tough time, and I just wanted to support him. What exactly do you mean by support? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. Her smile faltered for the briefest second, but she quickly regained her confidence. Just conversations. You know how important it is to have someone to talk to, especially when you're feeling lost. I wanted to push her further, but I also didn't want to scare her off. So, I changed the subject, though the tension between us still lingered in the air. But just before we said our goodbyes, she left me with a phrase that sent shivers down my spine. Melanie, I hope you trust me. Everything I do is for your own good. Those words made me even more suspicious. What did she mean? Why was she so adamant about convincing me of her good intentions? When I got home, Ben was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop. How was coffee with Sophie? He asked without even looking up.
Fine.
She talked about you a lot, I said, watching him closely. He hesitated for a split second before continuing to type. That's good. She really cares about us. Something inside me exploded, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew I had to be careful not to raise his suspicions. After that, I knew it was time to dig deeper. I reached out once again to the private investigator I had hired before and told him about my suspicions. I need everything on Sophie and Ben. Their meetings, calls, any connection they might have. I need to know the truth, I said firmly. Understood. I'll do everything I can, he assured me. The game had begun. I didn't know where it would lead, but I was ready to see it through to the end, even if it meant destroying my own world. A week had passed since I hired the private investigator. Each day felt heavier than the last as I lived in constant tension, waiting for news. Ben acted as he always did, attentive and caring. Sophie kept messaging me, suggesting we meet for coffee. But now, I could no longer look at either of them without feeling disgusted. One evening, my phone rang. It was the investigator. Melanie, I have something to show you. Can we meet tomorrow? Of course. Tell me where and when, I replied, feeling my heartbeat quicken. The next day, I met him in a small cafe. He placed a few photographs and printed out messages in front of me. Your husband and your friend have been meeting more often than you think, he said. I picked up the photos and saw the two of them together in different places, having dinner at restaurants, drinking coffee, and, in one particularly painful shot, Sophie hugging Ben in the park. But the biggest blow came from the messages. They were far from innocent. I can't be without you. When can we meet again? You always know how to make me smile. Melanie never even notices. My hands trembled as I read those words. Everything I had believed in crumbled like a house of cards. This is everything I've found so far. If you need more evidence, I can keep digging, the investigator said, watching my reaction carefully. No, this is enough, I replied, barely holding back tears. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts circled the same painful questions. Why? Why did they do this to me? I wasn't perfect, but I had always tried. I had always supported them both. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. The next day, I invited Sophie over for lunch at our home. I planned to stage the perfect scene, to expose them both in the worst possible way. When Sophie arrived, I greeted her with a smile, masking my true emotions. Ben was already home and seemed slightly tense. Maybe he suspected something. We sat at the table, and I started the conversation as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was boiling with rage, ready to tear apart their deception at the perfect moment. Sophie, Ben, there's something important I want to talk to you both about, I said, preparing for the inevitable explosion. A week had passed since I hired the private investigator. Each day felt heavier than the last as I lived in constant tension, waiting for news. Ben acted as he always did, attentive and caring. Sophie kept messaging me, suggesting we meet for coffee. But now, I could no longer look at either of them without feeling disgusted. One evening, my phone rang. It was the investigator. Melanie, I have something to show you. Can we meet tomorrow? Of course. Tell me where and when, I replied, feeling my heartbeat quicken. The next day, I met him in a small cafe. He placed a few photographs and printed out messages in front of me. Your husband and your friend have been meeting more often than you think, he said. I picked up the photos and saw the two of them together in different places, having dinner at restaurants, drinking coffee, and, in one particularly painful shot, Sophie hugging Ben in the park. But the biggest blow came from the messages. They were far from innocent. I can't be without you. When can we meet again? You always know how to make me smile. Melanie never even notices. My hands trembled as I read those words. Everything I had believed in crumbled like a house of cards. This is everything I've found so far. If you need more evidence, I can keep digging, the investigator said, watching my reaction carefully. No, this is enough, I replied, barely holding back tears. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts circled the same painful questions. Why? Why did they do this to me? I wasn't perfect, but I had always tried. I had always supported them both. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. The next day, I invited Sophie over for lunch at our home. I planned to stage the perfect scene, to expose them both in the worst possible way. The calm before the storm. When Sophie arrived, I greeted her with a smile, masking my true emotions. Ben was already home and seemed slightly tense. Maybe he suspected something. We sat at the table, and I started the conversation as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was boiling with rage, ready to tear apart their deception at the perfect moment. Sophie, Ben, there's something important I want to talk to you both about, I said, preparing for the inevitable explosion. I moved into a small hotel on the outskirts of the city, needing solitude to process everything. It felt as if my entire life had collapsed in an instant. But the more I thought about what had happened, the more I realized I didn't want to be a victim. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My sleep had been restless, but surprisingly, when I opened my eyes, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, I was alone and no one was manipulating me. I decided to finally do what I had been postponing for years: rebuild my life. I made a list of things I needed to do: find a new place to live, file for divorce, and rebuild my social circle, cutting out the people who had hurt me. That same day, I contacted a lawyer. I want to file for divorce. And I want to do it as soon as possible, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The lawyer looked at me and nodded. Do you have evidence of infidelity? I pulled out the photos and messages collected by the investigator. Will this be enough? This is more than enough, he replied, carefully reviewing the materials. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. I was finally taking control. That evening, when I returned to the hotel, my phone rang. It was Ben. I hesitated before answering, but in the end, I picked up. Melanie, I know you're angry, but we need to talk, he said. Talk? You think that after everything you've done, I want to talk to you? I snapped, trying to keep my emotions in check. Please, just give me a chance to explain. His voice sounded desperate. You had your chance, and you used it to destroy everything we built together, I said, and hung up. The next day, I received a message from one of my coworkers. She had heard about what happened and wanted to support me. Melanie, I know things are tough right now. If you need anything or even just company, let me know. A wave of gratitude washed over me. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, support can come from where you least expect it. I started looking at apartments, planning my move, and laying the foundation for my new life. That evening, I sat at my laptop and created a list of things I wanted to do just for myself: travel, enroll in courses I had always dreamed of, and revive old hobbies. The pain was still there, but I knew one thing for certain: this pain would make me stronger. A few weeks had passed since I left Ben and started my new life. I had moved into a cozy apartment overlooking a park, decorated it to my liking, and even discovered new hobbies. It finally felt like things were falling into place. But one day, I received a letter that once again turned my world upside down. When I opened my mailbox, among the usual bills and advertisements was a plain envelope with an unfamiliar address. Inside was a simple postcard and signed. It contained only one chilling sentence: "You don't know the whole truth." My heart clenched. Who could have sent this? Sophie? Ben? Or someone else entirely? Any thoughts of peace and closure instantly vanished, replaced by unease. The next day, I decided to call Sophie. She was the last person I wanted to speak to, but I knew she might hold the key to understanding this situation. Sophie, we need to meet, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Melanie, if you just want to argue, I don't have time for that, she replied coldly. This isn't about arguing. I need the truth, and you know exactly what I mean, I insisted. After a long pause, she agreed. We met at a cafe later that afternoon. When I arrived, she was already waiting. She looked different, not the confident, put-together woman I once knew. Instead, she seemed exhausted and uneasy. I got a letter, I said, getting straight to the point. Sophie shrugged. A letter? And what does that have to do with me? It said I don't know the whole truth. So tell me, what have I missed? My voice wavered, but I kept my posture firm. Sophie exhaled heavily and finally met my gaze.
Fine.
I can't keep this in anymore. Yes, Ben and I were together. But it wasn't just his fault, Melanie. You were always so busy with your career that you didn't even notice him drifting away. And you thought being his comfort was the solution? I snapped. I'm not justifying myself, she said, her voice tinged with guilt. But you should know, Ben wasn't just cheating on you with me. He had another woman. Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. Another one? What do you mean? Her name is Emily. She works with him at the office. They've been together for months. I sat there, frozen, struggling to process what I had just heard. Sophie kept talking, but her voice blurred into the background. Ben hadn't just betrayed me once, he had done it twice. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Sophie said. "And because I feel betrayed too." That evening, I returned home feeling emotionally drained. But this time, I knew I wouldn't look back anymore. I picked up my phone and deleted both Ben and Sophie from my contacts. It was my first step toward closing this chapter of my life for good. After my breakup with Ben and uncovering his many betrayals, I decided to focus on myself. I dedicated my time to self-improvement, taking art classes, running in the park every morning, and finally allowing myself to enjoy the little things in life. But one thing I was certain of: love was no longer for me. One Saturday morning, as usual, I was jogging in the park. The air was crisp, and the music in my headphones helped clear my mind. I stopped by the fountain to take a sip of water when I noticed someone pausing nearby. "Beautiful morning for a run," a voice said with a warm smile. I turned and saw a tall man with dark hair and kind brown eyes. His smile was so genuine that I couldn't help but smile back. "Yes, it's perfect," I replied, trying not to let my surprise show. We started talking. His name was Ryan, and as it turned out, he had recently moved to the city to start a job at a local architecture firm. A few days later, we ran into each other again at the park. This time, Ryan suggested grabbing coffee after our run, and to my own surprise, I agreed. Over coffee, I learned that he had been through a difficult past as well. His marriage had ended when he found out his wife had been cheating on him with his best friend. I shared my own story about Ben, and to my surprise, the conversation felt easy and natural. "You know, Melanie, I thought I'd never trust anyone again," Ryan admitted, looking at me sincerely. "But looking at you, I'm starting to have second thoughts." His words stirred something inside me. Could it be possible? After all the betrayals and pain, could I give myself a chance at something new? Our meetings became more frequent. Ryan was kind, attentive, and nothing like Ben. One evening, he invited me to dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. "I know you might still be afraid," he said over dinner, "but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere." "That sounds nice, but I'm not sure if I'm ready," I admitted honestly. "We all have our own pace." "I'm willing to wait," he said with a reassuring smile. Slowly, I started to open up to him. Ryan helped me realize that trust wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. He never pressured me, but he was always there, supporting me and showing me what it meant to be truly cared for. The more time I spent with Ryan, the more I realized how different we were, yet how deeply connected we had become. He never pressured me, never rushed me. He was simply there, and for the first time in a long while, I began to wonder, what if this is my chance to start over? One evening, as we walked through the park, an unexpected wave of anxiety washed over me. I stopped in my tracks and turned to him. "Ryan, what if I make the same mistake again? What if this is all just an illusion?" He took my hand gently and said, "Melanie, no one can promise that things will be perfect. But if we let fear of the past keep us from loving, we'll never know what true happiness feels like." His words were simple, but they struck straight into my heart. A few days later, I unexpectedly ran into Ben at the mall. He looked worn out, almost defeated. When our eyes met, I felt only one thing: peace. "Melanie, do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded, and we sat down at a small cafe. He admitted that his affair with Sophie had ended after she discovered the truth about Emily. He told me he regretted everything and wished he could turn back time. "I wish I could fix it all, but I know that's impossible." "You deserve better, Melanie," he said. His words no longer hurt me. I realized that I had finally let him go. That evening, I invited Ryan over for dinner at my new place. We cooked together, laughed and talked, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't expected. Happiness. As he was about to leave, I stopped him at the door. Ryan, I want to give this a chance.
I want to give us a chance.
His eyes lit up, and he pulled me into a tight embrace. Melanie, you have no idea how long I've been waiting to hear that. I finally understood that my past no longer had power over me. This was the start of a new chapter in my life, and I was beginning it with someone who saw me, valued me, and accepted me for who I was. Love doesn't guarantee perfect happiness, but it gives us the strength to move forward and believe that the future can be better.
Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.